A poor girl defended a janitor. Not knowing he was the millionaire owner, Emma Parker pushed open the tall glass doors of Sterling Dynamics with the worn resume folder held close to her chest. The morning wind still clung to her clothes after her long walk, but she forced her shoulders back, determined to appear confident. Inside, the lobby gleamed with polished marble floors and towering columns, the kind of place where successful people hurried with purpose. She was only here to ask for a chance, a position, a paycheck that might keep her mother's lights on for another month. She had just taken a few steps forward when a harsh voice cracked through the air. A supervisor stood over a janitor kneeling beside a mop bucket. The man's uniform was faded, the cuffs worn, and his head lowered as the supervisor barked insults at him loud enough for the entire lobby to hear. Emma froze. The words felt like they were cutting through her as much as him. She knew humiliation like that. She knew what it felt like to be spoken to as if you were invisible. The janitor did not defend himself. He did not lift his head. But there was something in the way he gripped the mop handle, steady, controlled, that made her heart twist. Before her fear could stop her, she stepped forward and spoke, her voice trembling but clear enough to turn heads. "Sir," he was already cleaning the spill. "I saw someone drop their drink." For a moment, everything in the lobby went quiet. Little did Emma know she had just confronted the man who controlled the building, while defending the man who actually owned it. Hello everyone. Before we continue with today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and it helps us bring you more powerful romantic drama stories. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much for your support. Now, let us return to our main character. Emma felt her pulse pounding as she stood in the center of the lobby, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. The supervisor stared at her with disbelief, as if shocked anyone would challenge him. A few onlookers whispered behind their hands. She could feel their eyes on her, could feel her chances at a job slipping away, but she did not move. She kept her gaze steady. The janitor slowly lifted his head. His face was gentle, the lines around his eyes softened by something deeper than age. There was calm in him, a kind of unshakable calm she had never seen in someone being humiliated. He looked at her with a quiet intensity, as if he were studying every detail of her expression. This man, this quiet janitor with worn sleeves, was actually Alexander Sterling, the 32-year-old millionaire owner of the corporation. He was undercover, hidden in plain sight while investigating corruption within his own staff. Every morning, he swept these floors to observe who people were when no one influential was watching. And now, a girl who had nothing to gain had stepped directly into his path. "Do you make it a habit to interrupt your betters?" the supervisor snapped. Emma swallowed hard. "I only speak when something is wrong," she said softly. Alexander watched her closely. Her voice was shaking, but her courage was steady. She did not know she had just passed a test she never knew existed. She did not know the man she defended would remember this moment for the rest of his life. And she definitely did not know that her single act of kindness was about to pull her straight into the hidden world of a millionaire who had been searching for honesty in a place that had long forgotten it. Emma stood in the middle of the lobby with her heart still pounding, but the supervisor had disappeared down the hallway, leaving only a faint trail of indignation behind him. The janitor, Alexander Sterling, though she had no reason to know that name, adjusted the handle of his mop, as if preparing to fade back into invisibility. But Emma felt a tug inside her, a quiet sense that she should say something, anything, to soften the moment she had just created. "I am sorry if I made things worse," she said gently. Alexander looked up at her. His voice, when it finally came, was calm and low. "You did not make it worse. You did what most people would never do." There was no bitterness in his tone. No resentment, no fear, just truth delivered with a steady certainty that made her straighten her spine without meaning to. She managed a small nod before slipping away toward the receptionist's desk, though she could feel his gaze lingering for a heartbeat longer before he returned to work. The receptionist eyed her with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "You must be here for the office assistant position," she said. "You can wait over there." She motioned to a row of chairs along the wall. Emma sat down, gripping her resume folder in her lap. Her pulse slowly settled, but her mind stayed restless. She could not shake the image of the janitor's eyes, steady, thoughtful, strangely observant. She wondered what kind of man endured humiliation with such grace. Across the lobby, Alexander pushed his mop bucket toward the service door. But he did not disappear right away. Instead, he paused near the hallway entrance, glancing back at the young woman sitting alone, shoulders tight, hands clasped. The girl who defended him without knowing who he was. The girl who had stepped in front of a storm she did not have to face. He felt something unfamiliar stir in him. Not irritation, not suspicion, something warmer. Respect, perhaps. A quiet fascination. For years he had walked these floors in disguise, watching how people treated those they believed had nothing to offer them. The cruelty he had seen had hardened him. But this girl had cut through that wall with one trembling act of courage. Alexander turned away only when another employee walked by. He slipped through the door leading to the service corridor, where he finally let the mask of indifference fall for a moment. His thoughts circled around the girl in the faded cardigan and scuffed shoes. He wondered how she had learned to stand up for someone weaker when she had so little strength to spare herself. Back in the lobby, the hallway door opened, and a woman in a navy suit stepped out. "Emma Parker," she called. "You are next." Emma rose quickly, smoothing her clothes with a nervous hand. She gave one more glance toward the service door, wondering if the janitor would come back, wondering if he was all right. Then she stepped into the interview room. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed softly. A desk separated her from two hiring managers who studied her with neutral expressions. Emma offered a polite smile, hoping it would be enough to hide the anxiety tightening her throat. The interview began with standard questions, but Emma felt the weight of the earlier scene pressing on her. The supervisors inside the company had noticed her confrontation. She worried it might cost her the very opportunity she had come for. Outside the room, Alexander reappeared in the hallway with a clipboard in hand, fully absorbed in his undercover role. But when he passed the interview room, he slowed. Through the narrow window in the door, he saw Emma sitting upright, answering questions with a seriousness that did not match her fragile frame. He recognized determination when he saw it. He saw it in himself every morning. He lingered only a second before moving on, but something inside him shifted. Emma Parker was not just kind. She was strong. He had watched hundreds of employees during his investigation, yet no one had caught his attention the way she did. And he had a strange feeling that this was not the last time their paths would cross. For now, she had no idea that the janitor she defended was the one man who could change everything about her life. And he had no idea that she was about to matter more than anyone he had ever met. Emma stepped out of the interview room with her shoulders slightly slumped, unsure whether she had done well or simply survived. The hiring managers had remained polite, but she sensed an undercurrent, an unspoken judgment she could not name. She clutched her resume folder a little tighter, trying to shake the feeling that the confrontation in the lobby had already shaped their impression of her. She walked back toward the lobby, her footsteps quiet against the polished floor. The supervisor from earlier passed her with a sharp glance, but did not say a word. His silence felt heavier than his insults. She kept her eyes lowered, hoping to avoid another confrontation. Across the room, behind the service corridor door, Alexander was completing a checklist on a clipboard, mapping employee performance and behavior. It was part of the investigation he had begun weeks earlier, but today his focus drifted. The moment Emma stepped into the lobby again, he noticed. Her expression carried uncertainty, but her posture was still steady, her steps composed. She had not collapsed under pressure. If anything, she looked stronger for having endured it. He watched her without revealing himself. There was something about her that did not match her fragile appearance. She moved like someone accustomed to carrying burdens too heavy for her age. He wondered who she was trying to take care of, what she was fighting for, and why someone with so little still chose kindness without hesitation. Emma sat down in the same chair as before, her fingers tracing the edge of her resume folder. A moment later, another applicant sat 2 chairs down from her. She overheard the woman whispering to her friend about the company, describing it as cutthroat, competitive, and merciless to anyone at the bottom. Emma felt her stomach twist. The building already felt cold enough. She did not need more proof that this place was not built for someone like her. Just then, a soft sound drew her attention. The service door opened, and the janitor stepped out again. He pushed the mop bucket ahead of him, head lowered, moving with the kind of quiet intention that made him blend into the background. But when he passed her row of chairs, he slowed slightly. "Did the interview go all right?" he asked, his voice low but sincere. Emma blinked in surprise. "I think so," she whispered. "At least, I hope so." His eyes warmed with a subtle reassurance. "Hope is a good start." She laughed softly, more from nerves than amusement. "I probably talk too fast. I do that when I am nervous." "Talking too fast does not disqualify anyone from doing a job," he said. "Character matters more." The simplicity of his words settled something inside her that had been shaking since morning. She nodded, grateful for the unexpected comfort. She did not notice that a pair of managers at the front desk were observing the exchange with disapproval. One whispered something to the other before walking away hurriedly, their expressions tight. To Emma, it was nothing more than passing movement. But to Alexander, it confirmed that the investigation was necessary. This company had forgotten what humanity looked like. After a quiet moment, he said, "Whatever happens, do not let anyone convince you that your worth is small." Emma looked at him, taken aback by the intensity of his tone. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means more than you know." Before she could say anything else, a receptionist stepped out of a nearby office. "Miss Parker," she called. "The hiring team would like to speak." "With you again." Emma stood abruptly, nerves clenching her stomach. She glanced at the janitor, who gave a slight nod of encouragement. She carried that small gesture with her as she followed the receptionist down the hall. Alexander watched her disappear into the corridor, his jaw tightening. Something was happening. Something he had not planned for. Employees did not usually get called back immediately, not unless there was concern or conflict behind closed doors. He remained still for a long moment, his hand tightening around the mop handle. His undercover role demanded silence, but his instincts pulled him forward. Emma Parker was stepping into a decision room she did not know existed, and Alexander Sterling was beginning to realize he would not be able to stay in the shadows for long. Emma followed the receptionist down a narrow hallway, her palms damp against the resumed folder she carried like a shield. The second interview room was smaller, with softer lighting and a window overlooking the parking lot. Two different managers waited inside, seated behind a sleek desk. Their expressions were polite, but their eyes carried a sharper edge than the ones she had met earlier. "Please have a seat, Miss Parker," one of them said. Emma sat carefully, feeling the air in the room press against her ribs. "We called you back because there was an incident in the lobby," the woman began, exchanging a quick glance with her colleague. "We want to understand what happened." Emma's stomach dropped. She tried to keep her voice steady. "There was a supervisor speaking harshly to a janitor. I only said something because it felt wrong." The man leaned forward slightly. "Do you often intervene in workplace conflicts?" Emma blinked. "No, sir. I did not mean to cause conflict. I just defended someone who was being mistreated." The woman folded her hands. "Sterling Dynamics values harmony. We cannot have new employees disrupting the chain of command." The words stung. Emma felt her breath catch, but she refused to look away. "I never intended to disrupt anything. I only wanted to be honest." A long pause hung between them, thick and uncomfortable. Emma could feel the decision forming before they even spoke it. "We appreciate your time," the woman finally said. "We will contact you if we choose to move forward." The dismissal was gentle, but the meaning was not. Emma stood with a small nod, her throat tight, and walked out of the room before the trembling reached her hands. She made her way back to the lobby, but the world felt heavier now. The bright marble floors seemed colder, the air sharper. She tried to swallow down the disappointment, but it pressed against her chest with every step. Alexander was near the far end of the lobby, pretending to examine a supply closet. But he saw her immediately. Her shoulders had slumped, her steps were small and slow, and her eyes dimmed in a way he could not ignore. He moved closer before he even realized he was doing it. "Emma," he said quietly. She stopped, startled that he remembered her name, but her voice came out strained. "I do not think I got the job." He studied her face, seeing more than defeat. He saw exhaustion, worry, fear she was trying to hide. "They spoke to you again?" he asked. She nodded. "They think I caused trouble." "You were standing up for someone who needed it," he said. "That is not trouble." Emma looked down at her shoes. "Maybe not. But people like me do not get to make mistakes in places like this." Her words hit him deeper than he expected. He had heard cruelty in his halls before, but hearing how she internalized it made something inside his chest twist sharply. "You did nothing wrong," he said firmly. As they spoke, the supervisor who had yelled at Alexander earlier walked by, muttering something under his breath. Emma flinched slightly. Alexander watched the man's retreating figure with a cold, careful stare, a stare no one would have expected from a janitor. Emma exhaled shakily and forced a small smile. I should head home. I need to check on my mother. Alexander hesitated. There was a question on his tongue, something about her mother's health, about how she managed everything alone. But he could not ask without revealing too much of his interest, too much of himself. Be safe on your way, he said instead. She nodded and stepped toward the exit. But just before the doors opened, she turned back. Thank you, she said softly. Even if today goes badly, I am glad I met someone kind. Alexander felt those words settle in the quietest part of him. She walked out of the building, the sun catching in her hair for a moment. Before the doors closed, across the lobby, the supervisor smirked at a coworker, unaware that the man he had insulted was the one signing his paycheck. And Alexander Sterling, the millionaire hiding behind a worn uniform, knew that today's events had changed more than Emma's chances at a job. They had changed his investigation, and they had changed him. Emma stepped out into the afternoon air, letting the glass doors of Sterling Dynamics close behind her. The cold breeze stung her cheeks, but she welcomed it. At least it pulled her out of the disappointment still clinging to her like a heavy coat. She started walking toward the bus stop, the resumed folder limp in her hands. She had rehearsed the possibility of rejection, but somehow it still felt heavier when it arrived, especially after everything that had happened. Halfway down the sidewalk, she paused to adjust her breath. Her mother would be waiting at home, trying not to show how much the illness was wearing her down. Emma did not have the luxury to break down. She needed to appear calm, hopeful, and ready for whatever came next. Survival demanded performance. Inside the building she had just left, Alexander stood near the window behind a tall indoor plant, watching her walk away. He had seen many applicants come and go. None of them lingered in his mind. But Emma did. There was a fragility about her, yes, but also a quiet resilience that reminded him of the early days of his own journey. Before wealth, before power, before everyone he worked with began to change in front of him. He moved away from the window and continued toward the upper floor, still in his janitor's uniform, still invisible to most. The elevator doors opened for a pair of executives, and he slipped in quietly, keeping to the corner. They barely spared him a look. She talked back to Ken. One of them whispered with disbelief. The applicant? The one in the cardigan? Yes. Ken is furious. You know how he gets when someone embarrasses him in public. Alexander listened silently, his jaw tightening. Emma had been right to defend him, and now she would suffer for it. He felt a sharp surge of anger, one he had not experienced in a long time. Not for himself, but for her. When the elevator reached the 5th floor, he stepped out and headed to a restricted section where a few trusted assistants worked. As soon as he crossed the threshold, a young woman named Julia lifted her head in surprise. Mr. Sterling, she whispered. You should not be out here dressed like that. Someone might recognize you. No one looks at a janitor, he replied softly. Julia approached with a tablet in hand. Your schedule for the afternoon. Push everything back 30 minutes, he said. There is someone I need to check on. Julia blinked. Is everything all right, sir? He did not explain. He simply walked past her into his private office and changed out of the uniform, his movements deliberate and controlled. When he re-emerged, he looked nothing like the quiet worker Emma had spoken to. No mop bucket, no worn sleeves, no disguise. Just the poised, sharp presence of a man accustomed to being obeyed. He left the building through a different entrance and spotted Emma at the bus stop. She sat alone on the bench, fingers nervously twisting the edge of her resume folder. He recognized that posture. She was trying to steady herself. He kept his distance at first, standing near a row of newspaper dispensers. Watching her now, without the barrier of his undercover role, felt strangely vulnerable. She had no idea he was the same man she had defended minutes before. And for reasons he could not explain yet, he wanted to keep it that way, at least for now. A bus pulled up, brakes hissing. Emma stood and stepped aboard. Alexander remained where he was, a faint pull in his chest as she disappeared behind the tinted glass. This was not part of his investigation. It was not part of any plan. But it was the first time in years that someone had reminded him of what integrity looked like. He exhaled slowly and turned away, unaware that their day was far from over. Fate had already begun weaving their paths together, and Emma Parker, without realizing it, had stepped directly into a story she never asked for but would soon become the center of. Emma rode the bus in silence, watching the city blur past the windows as she tried to control the tightness in her chest. She felt exhausted, but not the kind of exhaustion sleep could fix. It was the deeper kind, the fear of failing someone who depended entirely on her. When the bus reached her stop, she stepped out into her neighborhood, where the sidewalks were cracked and the houses leaned tiredly into one another. She walked the last block home, rehearsing how to tell her mother that the interview had gone nowhere. Inside their small apartment, her mother, Grace, sat on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her legs. Her breathing was shallow, but her smile was warm the moment she saw Emma. "How did it go, sweetheart?" Emma forced a soft smile. "I think it went all right. I will know soon." Her mother reached out, squeezing her hand gently. "You always do your best. That is all that matters." Emma nodded, even though her chest tightened at the lie. She excused herself to the bedroom and shut the door with a quiet click. Only then did she allow herself to sit on the edge of the bed, breathing slowly, steadying the swirl of worry. She opened a drawer to check the bills again, read notices and overdue statements. She closed it quickly, as if the weight of it could be sealed away. Back across the city, Alexander returned to his office, but his mind stayed fixed on Emma. He had intended to resume his investigation, but every report he opened blurred into the same static. He kept seeing the moment she stepped between him and the supervisor. The trembling in her voice. The courage anyway. The quiet dignity she carried even when the world tried to shrink her. He sat back in his chair, running a hand along his jaw. There was something about her that unsettled him, something that cracked through the armor he had built around himself. Years of work had taught him to read people with brutal accuracy. Kindness without motive was rare. Kindness without witness was almost unheard of. He rose abruptly and walked out of his office. His assistant Julia looked up with surprise. "Sir, do you need anything?" "No," he said. "I just need a moment." He took the elevator back down to the lobby. The evening shift was beginning, and employees hurried past him with clipped steps. Alexander scanned the room, noticing the supervisor, Ken, speaking to a group of staff members with an inflated confidence. The same man who had mocked him earlier. The same man who now, in this moment, bragged about his authority. Alexander stepped closer. Ken turned and stiffened when he recognized him, though he tried to mask the reaction. "Mr. Sterling," he said quickly, straightening his tie. "I did not expect to see you down here." Alexander glanced at the lobby where Emma had stood that morning. "I heard there was an incident today." Ken's jaw flexed. "Just an applicant causing trouble. Nothing serious." "Trouble," Alexander repeated, his tone flat. Ken swallowed. "She challenged me in front of everyone. She defended someone she believed was being mistreated," Alexander said quietly. Ken's face paled a shade. Alexander did not raise his voice. He did not need to. A company's strength is measured by how it treats the people with the least power. Remember that, Mr. Norris. Ken's posture crumbled under the weight of the words. Alexander walked away before the supervisor could respond, calm on the surface but burning beneath. Later that night, Emma stepped outside to take out the trash. The sky was fading into deep blue, and the old streetlights flickered as though struggling to stay awake. She paused near the curb, letting the cool air fill her lungs. She wondered if she had ruined everything for herself by speaking up. She wondered if she had made the wrong choice. A car passed slowly at the end of the street, sleek, dark, unfamiliar in her neighborhood, but she paid little attention. She did not know that Alexander had driven by after hours of restless thought. He had no plan to approach her. He only wanted to know she arrived home safely, that she had made it through the day without more trouble. He watched her from a respectful distance, his expression unreadable, before the car rolled on and disappeared around the corner. Emma walked back inside, unaware that the quiet man she defended, and the millionaire she had never met, had already begun circling her life like unfolding fate. And Alexander, behind the wheel, realized that whatever had begun in that lobby was not fading. It was growing. Emma woke early the next morning, long before the sun had risen. She moved quietly through the apartment so she would not wake her mother. She boiled water for tea, packed her mother's medication into a small container, and laid out breakfast on the counter. The rhythm of routine steadied her. even as the uncertainty of the previous day lingered like a shadow. She kept telling herself she would find another job. She always found a way, but the truth sat heavy beneath her ribs. Her mother's condition was getting worse, and the bills were no longer patient. When she finally stepped outside, the early morning air carried the chill of a day not yet decided. She had planned to visit a small cafe that was rumored to be hiring part-time, but halfway down the street, her phone buzzed with a notification from an unknown number. "Miss Parker, please come to Sterling Dynamics today at 11 o'clock. There has been an update regarding your application." For a moment, she stood frozen on the sidewalk, unsure whether to feel fear or hope. She stared at the message again. It did not sound like a rejection, but it did not sound like acceptance either. It sounded strange, but she could not afford to ignore it. She turned around and headed back toward the bus stop, her steps quickening as though pulled forward by a string she could not see. Meanwhile, inside Sterling Dynamics, tension buzzed faintly through the upper floors. Alexander had been reviewing disciplinary reports, but his thoughts kept circling back to Emma's second interview. He had instructed the hiring team to review her application again, emphasizing the importance of fairness. He had been firm but calm, not revealing his personal interest. Even so, he had seen the uncertainty flicker across their faces. His presence alone shifted outcomes. By late morning, he changed back into the janitor's uniform. He needed to remain undercover for the investigation, even if the lines between his roles felt more tangled now. When he entered the lobby, his eyes found her instantly. Emma stood near the reception desk, holding her resumed folder against her chest just as she had the day before. She looked tense, but hopeful enough to sting his chest. She turned when she heard the wheels of his mop bucket approaching. Her expression softened. "You are here again," she said, almost sounding relieved. "Every morning," he replied gently. "Are you here for another interview?" She nodded. "They told me to come back. I am not sure why." Alexander studied her face. She had not come here for pride or ambition. She had come because she had no choice. That truth weighed heavily in the air between them. Before he could say anything else, the lobby doors slid open sharply. Ken, the supervisor, stepped inside with a tight jaw and quick steps. He glanced at Emma, his expression twisting with irritation. "You," he snapped, pointing toward her. "You need to come with me." Emma flinched slightly. "Is something wrong?" "That depends on your definition," he muttered. Alexander's hand tightened around the mop handle. He walked closer, positioning himself between Emma and the supervisor with a casualness that hid intention. "You do not need to raise your voice," Alexander said quietly. Ken scoffed. "Stay out of this. She has caused enough trouble." A few employees gathered nearby, sensing tension. Their curious eyes settled on Emma, and she felt the familiar heat of humiliation climb her neck. She had walked into this building hoping for a chance. Instead, she was becoming a spectacle. Ken gestured toward the hallway. "Human Resources needs to speak with you. Now." Emma hesitated, her breath unsteady. She looked at Alexander, searching for something. Maybe reassurance, maybe permission to be afraid. His voice was calm when he spoke. "You should go," he said gently. "But do not let anyone intimidate you." His tone steadied her. She nodded once, squaring her shoulders before following Ken down the hall. But the moment she turned the corner, Ken's voice dropped sharply. "You think you can embarrass me and get away with it? Someone like you should be grateful we even let you through the door." Emma stopped mid-step. His words sliced deeper than she expected. She tried to breathe, but the tightness in her chest returned. She had come here to survive, not to fight battles she could not afford to win. Back in the lobby, Alexander's jaw clenched. He could not hear the words, but he could read tone and posture from a distance. He saw the fear in Emma's shoulders. He saw the arrogance in Ken's stride. And something inside him hardened, a line drawn sharp in his mind. Today would not end the same way yesterday did. Today, the mask he wore would begin to crack. Because the moment Emma Parker stumbled behind that hallway corner, Alexander Sterling started walking after her, the weight of his undercover role beginning to fall away step by step. Ken led Emma down the hallway with quick, irritated strides, each step echoing against the polished floor. Emma followed a few paces behind, her fingers tightening around the resume folder as if it were the last thing anchoring her to steady ground. The further they walked, the colder the hallway felt. She could sense something building, pressure, judgment, or maybe a decision already made without her. They stopped outside a small conference room. Ken pushed the door open with unnecessary force. Inside, he said sharply. Emma stepped in. The room was empty except for a long table, a few chairs, and a stack of documents placed neatly in the center. Ken closed the door behind them with a click that made her chest tighten. I want you to understand something, he began, pacing slowly. People like you need to know their place. You come in here, trying to make a scene, trying to act like some hero. I did not try to make a scene, she said gently. I only stood up for someone who what? Ken snapped. A janitor? You think he matters? You think you are here to fix the world? Emma felt her throat tighten. I never said that. You might as well have, he muttered. Human resources will decide what to do with your application. But if you want my advice, do not expect anything good. Emma lowered her gaze. Shame pressed against her ribs, mixing with frustration. She wanted to defend herself, but every time she tried, her voice felt smaller. She wished she had someone standing beside her. She wished she had even a little power. Before Ken could speak again, the door swung open. Alexander stepped inside, but not as the janitor. Not with the worn uniform, not with the mop handle, not with the quiet invisibility he had carried the last few days. He stood tall in a dark suit, his presence filling the room instantly. His hair was neatly styled, his posture sharp, and his expression unshakable. There was no sign of the humble worker Emma had spoken to. This was a different man entirely, confident, decisive, and unmistakably in command. Ken's face turned the color of ash. And Mr. Sterling, he stuttered. I did not expect. You never do, Alexander said, his voice calm but cold enough to silence the air itself. Emma stared at him, her breath catching. Her mind scrambled to understand what she was seeing. The gentle janitor from the lobby had vanished. In his place stood a man who radiated authority, so much authority that Ken looked like he might wilt under the weight of it. Alexander stepped further inside, his gaze shifting, to Emma with a softness that cut through the tension. Miss Parker, he said gently, please stay seated. Her heart thudded as she sank into the chair, stunned, confused, and suddenly aware that she had been speaking to someone far more powerful than she ever imagined. Alexander turned his attention back to Ken. I have listened to enough of your behavior these past weeks, he said. But today, you crossed a line. Ken stumbled over his words. Sir, she was causing trouble. No, Alexander interrupted. She was doing what any decent human being should. Something you failed to do. Ken swallowed hard. I was only trying to maintain order. And in doing so, you humiliated a woman who came here seeking honest work, Alexander replied. A woman who showed more integrity in the span of one morning than some of my staff have shown in their entire careers. Emma stared at the floor, her cheeks warm, unsure if this was really happening. Alexander's voice lowered, steady and lethal. You will pack your belongings. Effective immediately, you are terminated. Ken's mouth opened, but no words came out. The color drained from his face. Leave, Alexander commanded softly. Ken hurried out, closing the door behind him without a sound. The room fell quiet. Emma sat frozen, her heart pounding hard enough to echo in her ears. She could not bring herself to look at him. She did not know how. The janitor had disappeared, and the truth stood in front of her in a tailored suit and an authority that reshaped the air. Alexander approached slowly, softening his posture so he would not intimidate her further. Emma, he said gently, I am sorry you were treated this way. You deserved better. She finally lifted her gaze, confusion swirling in her eyes. You are not a janitor. No, he said with quiet honesty. I am not. Then who are you? He exhaled softly. My name is Alexander Sterling. I am the owner of this company. The words settled between them like the opening of a curtain revealing an entirely different world. Her breath shook. Why were you pretending to be someone else? Alexander held her gaze. Because sometimes the truth is only visible from the ground, and I needed to see who people really were. Emma felt the room tilt slightly, her reality bending around the revelation. And you, he added, softly, showed me something I have not seen in a very long time. She swallowed, unsure whether to feel grateful or betrayed. What did I show you? She whispered. Alexander's expression warmed, not with power, but with sincerity. That integrity still exists. Emma sat in the conference room, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The walls felt closer now, thick with the weight of everything she had just learned. Alexander Sterling, the quiet janitor she defended, the man who listened to her without judgment, the one person who made her feel seen, was the millionaire owner of the entire corporation. Her thoughts spun in slow, disbelieving circles. Alexander pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, but he did not lean back in power. He leaned forward, lowering himself to her level, softening the space between them. "I know this is a lot to take in," he said quietly. Emma nodded, though her breath came unsteady. I do not understand. Why did you let me think you were someone else?" His expression softened. "Because I needed to know who in this building treated others with respect, no matter their title. I needed to know who I could trust." He held her gaze. "And you showed me that without hesitation." Emma looked down at her hands. "I was only trying to do what was right." "That is exactly why it mattered," Alexander said. Silence stretched gently between them. Not tense, not cold, just full of everything they were both trying to process. Emma still felt overwhelmed, but the fear that had clenched her chest earlier began to loosen. A question rose in her mind, quiet but persistent. "Am I in trouble?" she asked softly. Alexander shook his head. "No, you are not in trouble." His voice warmed. "If anything, you may have saved this company a great deal by exposing the kind of behavior we can no longer allow." Emma blinked, taken aback. "I never meant to expose anything." "You exposed truth," he replied. "And that takes courage." He stood and held out a small card. "Human Resources will process your application again, this time without bias." But, he hesitated, choosing his next words carefully. "I would like to offer you something else." Emma lifted her eyes slowly. "What do you mean?" Alexander drew a quiet breath. "There is an opening for a position that requires someone who is observant, patient, and honest. Someone who listens before they judge. Someone I can trust." His voice lowered with sincerity. "I would like you to consider being my executive assistant." Emma stared at him, stunned. "Me? But I do not have the right background. I do not have experience." "I am not. You are exactly what this position needs," he said. "And exactly what I need on my team." Her heartbeat stumbled. She had dreamed of stability, of a job that would allow her mother to breathe without fear of overdue notices. But she had never imagined this. An opportunity so far above anything she had believed possible. "I do not want to pressure you," Alexander continued gently. "Think about it. Talk to your mother. Let me know your answer tomorrow." Emma took the card with trembling fingers. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. He held her gaze with a calm, steady sincerity. "Because you stood up for me when you thought I was a stranger with nothing to offer you. You acted out of kindness alone, and I do not forget things like that." Her eyes warmed with unshed emotion. For the first time in days, hope did not feel like a fragile wish. It felt like a doorway she could walk through. Alexander rose and opened the conference room door for her. "I will arrange a car to take you home," he said gently. She stepped out into the hallway, still holding the card as though it might disappear if she blinked. Employees whispered as she passed, sensing something had shifted. They just did not know what. At the end of the hallway, she glanced back. Alexander stood in the doorway, watching her with an expression she had not seen on anyone in a long time. Respect, and something tender she could not name yet. Emma walked toward the lobby, each step lighter than the last. Outside, the afternoon sunlight warmed her face. She breathed deeply, letting the air fill her lungs, letting possibility settle into her bones. Behind her, in the quiet of the conference room, Alexander exhaled slowly. He knew this was only the beginning. The investigation would continue, but so would something else, something that started the moment Emma Parker stepped between him and cruelty with nothing but trembling courage. Their lives had crossed by accident, but what came next would not be an accident at all. It would be choice, and it would be theirs.